Skyrim is a land built on history. Not just the kind you're told through quests and dialogue, but the kind that's buried in its ruins, carved into its walls, and hidden in places most players walk straight past. Ancient cities lie beneath the surface, forgotten tombs hold the stories of long-dead kings, and entire civilizations leave behind traces that are never fully explained. Some locations don't just exist for exploration or combat. They exist to tell a story, not loudly, not directly, but through atmosphere, design, and the small details that piece together something much larger than what you see on the surface. Because in Skyrim, the world doesn't revolve around the player. It existed long before you arrived. And in some places, you can still feel that history pressing in from every direction. Buried beneath the frozen landscape not far from Winterhold lies Sarthal, a ruin that at first glance might seem just like any other Nordic tomb. Another stretch of stone corridors filled with draga and forgotten relics. But the deeper you go, the more it becomes clear that Sarthal is not just a ruin. It is one of the most historically significant locations in all of Skyrim. A place where the foundations of human presence in the province were first established, and where one of the most important and suspicious events in the Elder Scrolls history took place. Unlike many locations that hint at lore through scattered details, Sarthal is defined by its past, with every part of it tied to a story that reaches far beyond the ruin itself. Sarthal is known as the first human settlement in Skyrim, founded by Ysgramor and his companions after their arrival from Atmora. That alone gives it weight. This is not just an old city, it is the beginning of Nordic civilization in the region. Everything that comes after, the holds, the culture, the identity of Skyrim itself, traces back in some way to this place. But Sarthal's importance isn't just in its founding, it's in what happened shortly after. The Night of Tears. According to Nordic history, the Snow Elves attacked Sarthal, slaughtering its inhabitants in a sudden and devastating assault. Ysgramor, one of the few survivors, fled back to Atmora and returned later with the 500 companions, beginning the long and brutal conflict that would eventually lead to the near extinction of the Snow Elves as a visible civilization. This event is often framed as the catalyst for one of the most defining wars in Skyrim's history, a moment that shaped the province's cultural and racial tensions for generations. But this place complicates that narrative, because as you explore the ruin, you begin to uncover something that doesn't quite align with the traditional telling of events. The Eye of Magnus, a powerful and mysterious artifact hidden deep within Sarthal, suggests that the city was not just a settlement, but a site of immense magical significance. And that raises a question that the game never fully answers. Did the Snow Elves attack Sarthal out of pure aggression, or were they trying to reclaim or protect something hidden beneath it? That ambiguity is what makes Sarthal so lore-rich. It doesn't just present history, it challenges it. The version of events told by the Nords is clear and emotionally driven, a peaceful settlement destroyed by a hostile force. But the presence of the Eye of Magnus introduces doubt. It implies that there may have been more to the story, something that was either misunderstood or deliberately omitted over time. And that idea, that history is shaped by perspective, runs through the entire location. Even the structure of Sarthal reflects this layered path. As you move through the ruin, you're not just exploring a tomb. You're moving through different periods of time. The original settlement, the aftermath of the attack, and the later use of the site as a burial ground all overlap in a way that makes the location feel less like a single place and more like a timeline carved into stone. Each section tells a different part of the story, but none of them give you the full picture on their own. The involvement of the College of Winterhold adds another layer to this as well. When you first visit Sarthal, it's as part of a scholarly excavation, a controlled attempt to study and understand the past. But even this approach also feels limited. The college recognises the importance of the site, but it doesn't fully grasp the implications of what it contains. The discovery of the Eye of Magnus quickly shifts the focus from history to immediate danger, pulling attention away from the deeper question that this tomb raises. And that shift feels intentional, because Sarthal isn't a place that gives you answers, it's a place that leaves you with uncertainty. The Draga that inhabit the ruin are another reminder of this. Like many Nordic tombs, they represent the dead clinging to what remains of their world. But in Sarthal, they feel more significant. These are not just ancient warriors, they are the remnants of the very first Nords to settle in Skyrim. Their presence ties the player directly to that origin point, turning what could have been a standard dungeon into something far more meaningful. There's also a quiet tragedy to this tomb that isn't immediately obvious. It was once a beginning, a place of hope and expansion and new life. But now it's a grave, not just for the people who died there, but for the truth of what actually happened. The story has been told, retold, and solidified into something that may not fully reflect reality. And Sarthal, buried and forgotten for so long, becomes a symbol of that loss. In many ways, it represents how Skyrim handles its own history, not as something fixed and certain, but as something shaped by those who survive it. What makes Sarthal stand out among Skyrim's many ruins is not just its age or its connection to major events, but the way it encourages you to question what you're being told. It doesn't rely on spectacle or scale to convey its importance. Instead, it builds its significance through implication, through the gaps in its story, and that's what makes it one of the most lore-rich places in the entire game. Because it's not just about what happened there, it's about what we think happened, and how easily that understanding can be incomplete. Sarthal doesn't just show you the past, it reminds you that the past, especially in a world like Skyrim, is never as simple as it seems. Few places in Skyrim feel as heavy with history as Labyrinthian. Unlike many ruins that hint at the past through scattered details or isolated events, Labyrinthian feels like a location where multiple eras of Skyrim's history have collapsed in on themselves. It is not just ancient, it is layered, almost suffocatingly so, with each corridor and chamber representing a different moment in time. Nordic legacy, dragon cult influence, and the rise and fall of the College of Winterhold all intersect here, turning Labyrinthian into something far greater than a dungeon. It becomes a convergence point, a place where Skyrim's past refuses to stay buried. Long before it became associated with mages and magical disasters, Labyrinthian was known as Bromjanar, a significant city during the time of the dragon cult. This alone places it among the most important locations in ancient Skyrim. The dragon priests were not just powerful figures, they were central to the structure of Nordic society at the time, ruling through both religious authority and fear. Bromjanar, as one of their strongholds, would have been a place of immense influence, deeply tied to the worship of dragons and the systems that upheld their dominance. But like many remnants of that era, Labyrinthian does not present this history in a clear or complete way. Instead, it lingers in fragments, in the architecture, in the presence of dragon priest masks, and most notably, in the hidden Bromjanar sanctuary. This secret area, accessible only through the collection of all dragon priest masks, feels almost mythological in its design. It exists outside of normal gameplay flow, disconnected from any quest, and yet it holds one of the most powerful artifacts tied to the dragon cult. The fact that such an important piece of lore is hidden away, requiring extensive exploration and dedication to uncover, reinforces the idea that Labyrinthian's history is not meant to be easily understood. And that's just one layer. Centuries later, Labyrinthian becomes tied to the College of Winterhold through one of the most infamous events in its history, the failed expedition of Archmage Savos Aran and his fellow apprentices. This is where the ruin shifts from ancient history to something more personal, more immediate. As you progress through Labyrinthian during the college questline, you witness echoes of that expedition, not through direct interaction, but through spectral memories that replay the group's final moments. These scenes are some of the most effective pieces of environmental storytelling in Skyrim. They don't just tell you what happened, they show you the gradual breakdown of trust, the desperation, and ultimately the betrayal that defined the expedition. Savos, who would later become Archmage, survives by sacrificing his fellow students, sealing them away to contain a powerful entity known as Morokai. It's a decision that ensured his survival and, by extension, his rise to power. But it also casts a long shadow over his character. What makes this particularly compelling is how it reframes the College of Winterhold itself. The institution presents itself as a place of learning and control, a refuge for those who study magic. But Labyrinthian also reveals a darker side, one where ambition and fear and the pursuit of knowledge can lead to irreversible consequences. It suggests that the college's authority is not as stable or as moral as it might appear, adding another layer of complexity to its role in Skyrim. Then there's Morokai. As one of the dragon priests, Morokai represents the lingering power of the dragon cult, a direct link between Skyrim's ancient past and its present. His presence within Labyrinthian ties the two major layers of the ruin together, the era of the dragon priests and the more recent history of the college. He is both a relic and a threat, something that should have remained buried but continues to influence events long after his time has passed. This blending of timelines is what makes Labyrinthian feel so unique. Most locations in Skyrim are rooted in a single identity: a Nordic tomb, a Dwemer ruin, a bandit camp. Labyrinthian refuses that simplicity. It is all of those things at once, shifting between identities as you move through it. One moment you're navigating ancient burial chambers, the next you're witnessing the aftermath of a magical catastrophe. The environment never lets you settle into a single interpretation of what the place is. Even the name Labyrinthian feels intentional as well. It's not just a physical maze, though it certainly functions as one. It's a narrative maze as well, a place where history loops back on itself, where answers lead to more questions, and where understanding the full story requires piecing together fragments from entirely different time periods. There's no single clear explanation for everything that has happened here. Instead, you're left to navigate the complexity on your own. There's also a sense of isolation that amplifies all of this. Labyrinthian is not a place people casually visit. It sits in the mountains, distant and imposing, separated from the rest of Skyrim both geographically and thematically. When you enter it, you're stepping into something self-contained, a pocket of history that has remained largely untouched. That isolation allows its stories to linger, undisturbed, giving the entire location a kind of eerie permanence. And in the end, what makes Labyrinthian one of the most lore-rich places in Skyrim is not just the amount of history it contains, but the way that history is presented. It's not organised or easily digestible. It's fragmented, overlapping, and often contradictory. It forces you to engage with it, to question it, to accept that you may never fully understand everything it holds. It is a place where power was once centralised, where knowledge led to betrayal, and where the past continues to shape the present in ways that are never fully resolved. Labyrinthian doesn't just tell a story, it buries it, and leaves you to find your way through it. Hidden deep within the mountains of the Reach, carved directly into the stone and concealed behind layers of secrecy, Skyhaven Temple stands as one of the most historically dense and quietly significant locations in all of Skyrim. Unlike ruins that tell fragmented stories or isolated events, Skyhaven Temple feels deliberate, constructed with purpose, preserved with intention, and tied directly to one of the most important ongoing conflicts in the Elder Scrolls universe: the war between dragons and those sworn to hunt them. It is not just a relic of the past, it is a continuation of it. Skyhaven Temple was built by the Blades, an ancient order dedicated to serving the Dragonborn and, more importantly, to combating the threat of dragons. But by the time you discover it, the Blades are nearly extinct, hunted down and dismantled by the Thalmor following the events of the Great War. That context alone gives the temple a sense of weight. This is not just headquarters. It is the last remnant of a once powerful organization, a place that has outlived the people it was built to serve. And yet, despite its emptiness, it doesn't feel abandoned. It feels like it's waiting. The journey to Skyhaven Temple reinforces this idea. You don't just stumble upon it. You have to earn your way in. Hidden behind Karthspire, guarded by Forsworn, and sealed with mechanisms that require the blood of a Dragonborn, the temple is intentionally inaccessible. This isn't a place meant to be found by chance. It is designed to remain hidden until the right person arrives. And that design speaks volumes about the Blades themselves. They weren't just warriors. They were strategists, planners, individuals who understood the importance of secrecy and legacy. Once inside, the temple reveals its true significance through the Alduin's Wall, a massive carved relief that depicts the history of dragons, the rise of Alduin, and the eventual defeat brought about by a Dragonborn. This is one of the clearest examples in Skyrim of history being recorded with purpose. Unlike the fragmented stories of Sarthal, or the layered confusion of Labyrinthian, Alduin's Wall presents a narrative that is structured, intentional, and preserved across generations. But even here, there's an underlying complexity, because Alduin's Wall is not just a historical record, it's an interpretation. It shows events from the perspective of the Blades, emphasising the role of the Dragonborn as a hero figure, a necessary force in ending Alduin's reign. It simplifies a conflict that elsewhere in Skyrim is presented with more ambiguity. Dragons are not purely mindless destroyers. Alduin is not just a force of chaos. He is tied to prophecy, to cycles of destruction and rebirth. And yet the Wall presents a more straightforward version of events. That contrast makes Skyhaven Temple feel less like a neutral archive and more like a curated legacy. The Blades didn't just record history, they shaped how it would be remembered. There's also a strong sense of continuity within the temple. Unlike many ancient locations that feel disconnected from the present, Skyhaven Temple directly ties into the Dragonborn's journey. It doesn't just tell you what happened, it informs what you need to do next. The past is not separate from the present here, it actively guides it. The knowledge preserved within the temple becomes a tool, something that pushes the story forward, rather than simply existing as background detail. And that makes it feel alive in a way few lore-heavy locations do. At the same time, the temple carries a quiet sense of loss. The Blades as an organisation are no longer what they once were. Delphine and Esbern represent what's left, fragments of a once unified group trying to reclaim their purpose. And Skyhaven Temple, despite its grandeur and historical importance, cannot restore what has already been lost. It provides a foundation, a reminder of what the Blades stood for, but it doesn't rebuild them. It simply gives them a place to stand again. That tension between past and present is what really defines the location. It is both a monument and a refuge, a place built to endure, now occupied by those trying to rediscover what it was meant to be. Even its architecture reinforces this idea. The temple blends seamlessly into the mountain, hidden in plain sight, designed not to dominate the landscape, but to become part of it. This reflects the philosophy of the Blades, to operate quietly, to observe, to act when necessary, but remain unseen otherwise. There's a discipline to its design, a sense that every element serves a purpose. And that purpose has not faded, even if the people who built it have. In many ways, Skyhaven Temple represents one of the clearest examples of intentional legacy in Skyrim. It is not a ruin left behind by accident. It is a place meant to be found, but only under the right circumstances. It preserves knowledge not just for remembrance, but for action. It bridges the gap between ancient history and present conflict in a way that feels direct and meaningful. And what makes it one of the most lore-rich places is not just the information it contains, but the clarity of its role within the larger narrative. It doesn't just hint at the past, it connects it to the future. It shows how history can be preserved, interpreted, and ultimately used to shape what comes next. But even with that clarity, there's still something quietly unresolved about it. Because while Skyhaven Temple tells you what the Blades believed, it leaves open the question of whether they were right. And in a world like Skyrim, where history is rarely as simple as it's presented, that uncertainty is what gives the temple its lasting weight. It is not just a place of answers, it is a place of perspective. Skyrim is a world that constantly reminds you of its scale, but its true depth doesn't come from how big it is. It comes from how much has already happened before you arrive. Places like Sarthal, Labyrinthian, and Skyhaven Temple aren't just locations you clear out and move on from. They are layers, pieces of history that was never meant to be fully understood in a single visit. Each one tells a story, but more importantly, each one leaves something out. A missing perspective, a questionable truth, a version of events that feels just a little too convenient. And that's what makes them so powerful, because the lore in Skyrim isn't handed to you cleanly. It's fragmented, biased, sometimes even contradictory. Sarthal makes you question the origins of conflict. Labyrinthian shows how history can collapse in on itself, leaving behind only echoes and consequences. Skyhaven Temple presents a carefully preserved narrative, one that feels authoritative, but not necessarily complete. Together they reveal something much bigger about the world, that history in Skyrim isn't about certainty, it's about interpretation. These places don't just exist to give you answers. They exist to make you think about who those answers are coming from and why they were preserved in the first place. They turn exploration into something more than just movement through space. It becomes a process of piecing together meaning, of deciding what you believe in a world where every story has been shaped by time, conflict, and perspective. And maybe that's the most important part, because long after the quests are finished, the enemies are gone and the loot has been collected, these places do tend to stay with you, not because of what they told you, but because of what they didn't.